Schools have definitely changed. There is a lot of impact in regards to the CCM, that operations that has been going on countrywide.
It was very successful. That is to say, we are able to meet the schools in their various schools. In the provinces, almost 23 schools that we've covered today, most of them in the provinces. Where my experience is that most of the problems that we find out are in the provinces. They face a lot of challenges, though education department is doing well. They are the best departments that I have in passing, but I think there's a need for them to intervene.
We have had a very fruitful mission. We've gone from regions 4 to 2 to 1, and we are quite impressed overall, of the findings in the schools. Of course, we will do a report, an end of tour report, which we will share with the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education. But before that, I would want to place on record our appreciation to the Ministry for financing this tour and allowing us to work independently. The schools were not notified that we were coming as a select committee on education, and therefore we found them in their natural settings.
Samuel Ba, Grts.
Thousands of supporters of Senegal's PDS party have stormed the streets of the capital Senegal, Dakar, in a mass show of support for the embattled Karim Wade. An oil-giant British Petroleum, or BP in short, has been ordered to pay $4.5 billion to the U.S. government for the 2010 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. We will take a look at those and other stories right after this first break. Welcome back. Thousands of supporters of Senegal's PDS party Friday stormed the streets of the capital Dakar to show their backing for Karim Wade, who is facing investigations for corruption. As we hear in this CFI report, the son of the former Senegalese president and 6 others who all served the Wade government are barred from leaving the country.
PDS supporters gathered near the gendarmerie in Dakar to cheer on Karim Wade, who is under investigation for corruption. Karim Wade, the former Senegalese president's son, was questioned for 10 hours on the origin of his fortune. The corruption investigation is still underway. Wade and 6 former officials are now not allowed to leave the country. The former Minister of the Interior is among them, but he rejects the investigation.
This court cannot judge former ministers. Only the High Court of Justice can do that, under terms of Article 101 of the Constitution.
But Senegalese President Macky Sall wants justice to run its course.
It is in the interest of a citizen who is subpoenaed for questioning to answer. If he does not answer, he'll be investigated in one way or another.
The Senegalese people are following the investigation very closely, as it is the first of its kind since the country gained independence.
British Petroleum, or BP in short, is ordered to pay a fine of $4.5 billion to the U.S. government for the 2010 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The unprecedented ecological disaster saw hundreds of kilometers of the coastline destroyed by the oil spill. This is said to be the largest criminal environment settlement to have ever occurred. Details in this report.
It was an unprecedented ecological disaster, officially responsible for the huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in April 2010. British Petroleum will pay $4.5 billion in fines and other payments to the U.S. government. It will also plead guilty to 14 criminal charges connected to the giant oil spill. The main $4.5 billion payment will go towards the environment, cleaning up hundreds of kilometers of coastline and preventing future oil spills. BP will reportedly not have much difficulty making the payments.
The $4 billion settlement is the largest criminal environmental settlement to date. So it is quite an amount of money, but to a corporation like BP, many consider that, with the range and scope of the disaster in the Gulf, to really just be a drop in the bucket.
BP has already unloaded some $35 billion worth of assets to cover its losses linked to the giant spill. Aside from the criminal charges, BP is also facing civil claims related to the spill. More than 100,000 people suffered losses, including fishermen, tour operators, and hotel and restaurant owners.
I was down, I guess, like 30, 35, 40% less business, you know, since this happened.
I think it's about time they settled it, and I know it was a criminal act, you know, everybody did. They just, they did things they wasn't supposed to do.
Over a 4-month period, hundreds of millions of gallons of crude oil were dumped or spilled into the environment. 11 people died when the platform exploded. 2 BP officials are still facing involuntary homicide charges. A third BP official was charged with lying to Congress, purposely underestimating the amount of crude oil spilled into the water.
The civil war in Syria has killed more than 20,000 people since it started 20 months ago. As Syrian refugees continue to storm Turkey to escape the conflict, Turkish citizens fear that the conflict may spill over to their country. CNN's Ivan Watson reports the Syrian situation has now turned into a blame game between rebel fighters and government troops.
Residents of the Turkish town of Ceylanpınar breathe a sigh of relief. For the first time in a week, there were no explosions, bullets, or bombs on Thursday. The Turkish military appears to have fortified the border here after a rebel assault on the neighboring Syrian town of Ras Al Ain triggered a week of fighting that threatened to spill over into Turkey.
Ras Al Ain and Ceylanpınar are basically one town separated only by a fence. So when there's fighting across the border in Syria, the people here in Turkey see it, hear it, and feel it.
A local Turkish official shows me shop windows that were blown out this week by Syrian government airstrikes across the border. Of course we were afraid, he says. Jets flew overhead. There were bombardments. The children were terrified. We had to close the schools for their safety. This sleepy Turkish town is now full of thousands of Syrian refugees. Some tried to take advantage of the lull in hostilities to go home to see whether their houses were still standing. But we found one Syrian who came to Turkey with a very different mission. This activist, who calls himself Abu Muslim, asks us to hide his face to protect his family in Syria.
I get a picture and interviews with the people in Syria.
And what are you doing with the pictures now?
Send to TVs, to upload to YouTube.
YouTube?
Yes. To all the people in the world see this.
To see what happened.
Yes.
Using only his cell phone as a camera, Abu Muslim filmed pictures of bombed-out buildings he now distributes over the internet. The same simple method used by activists who filmed terrified civilians fleeing as Syrian warplanes attacked Ras Al Ain earlier this week. They also showed how rebels led wounded civilians to the border gate, where they were met by Turkish soldiers and ambulances. Today, on the Turkish side of the border, municipal buildings and ordinary homes are full of refugees.
The refugees here are understandably nervous to speak to us on camera, but in private conversations, some of them tell me that they blame the rebels, the Free Syrian Army, for bringing the conflict to their town, which until last week had been considered a safe haven.
The Free Syrian Army has claimed victory in Ras Al Ain, apparently ignoring the fact that some residents did not want the rebels here in their town in the first place. Ivan Watson, CNN, Ceylanpınar on the Syrian-Turkish border.
And before we go, a reminder of our headlines. The Nigerian community in the Gambia has recognized the leadership qualities of President Jammeh with the conferment of the award of Grand Patron on the head of state. Vice President Jai Saidi and